What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we are here with Kevin of the Almighty Disciple. Thanks for coming on the show today. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here, man. After years of listening to you guys, it's great to see you guys are still absolutely killing it. We got some new stuff coming such as the new single "Sound the Alarm." And being that your last record came out in 2023, is a single such as "Silent Alarm." Is this like a good representation of what the follow-up to Skeleton Psalms is going to sound like, or is this just sort of like one little one-off sort of taste and not really representative of anything in the future?
Yeah, we've been doing this a lot lately. So Skeleton Songs came out, I guess, a couple of years ago now, and it had 10 tracks on it. And we always write like 30 songs for each album. And there's some songs that we just believed in but didn't get around to finishing or weren't sure about, and things like that. And Sound the Alarm was one of those that we really loved. We always loved it. We just never got around to finishing it. And since the album was out, we got in the habit of like putting out deluxe editions, so kind of finishing the songs that hadn't been finished yet. And so we put out one a few months ago called "If You Say So," and then "Sound the Alarm" is the second one.
Yeah.
So we're just going to keep rolling them out until and when the last one gets released, that's when the deluxe edition that'll all come out. It's going to have some live tracks on it as well and some other fun stuff.
It almost seems like it's, in a way, like standing out in its own right, the new stuff, but at the same time it is sort of like the sequel to Skeleton Psalms in a way, because I loved Skeleton Psalms, and there was definitely
exactly.
It definitely left me wanting a lot more, and this seems to be the more that we're craving.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. And that's 10 tracks is the lowest amount of tracks we've ever put on an album. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because, that was kind of hopefully what we were going for was, somebody listen to a 10 track album and want more. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost sort of jokingly say that 10 songs is almost an EP by today's standards. So
it's crazy. I know.
Yeah. But there's a lot to celebrate in the realm of Disciple, because this year is pretty much 30 years since the world has first heard of Disciple, pretty much. I believe,
right.
Yeah, I believe like What Was I Thinking was the first time, we've all heard of Disciple. So 30 years now into the game, longer, because I'd imagine that there was a lot of building up before the release of that album. I mean, how would you say the evolution of your sound really evolved? Because when you look at like What Was I Thinking, and you compare that to like Scars Remain, which is the record that I discovered Disciple on, and then you compare you compare that to just the constant evolution. There's been a lot of different experimentation, a lot of different sounds. How has the sort of evolution, how do you look at your own evolution in that sense?
I really attribute it to the band members that are in the band at the time, and we've had a really good long stretch. Like the first few guys were in the band for like 15 years, the next one like 5, and then these guys have been in the band for between 10 and 15 years. And so it's really all the different styles that they bring to the songwriting, and we all will write things that we like, and then we will try to expand and experiment and write things that are just different, just trying to be better songwriters. And so all these different, human beings that are like in this, kind of creative process, it really creates an eclectic collection of songs. I mean, you go back, like you said, to 95. I mean, you even think about what our minds were thinking about in 1995. We just got assaulted with, Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden. I mean, that was like the music that we thought was incredibly cool at that day. And so, but we were also like really big Pantera fans, and Stuck Mojo. I don't know if you know who they are or whatever, but yes. And so those kinds of bands were like, we really just took everybody. We were just influenced by everybody. And so we couldn't really figure out who we were until the This Might Sting a Little album. And that's kind of like where we kind of landed on this more Pantera, Stuck Mojo kind of, Seven Dust melodic kind of feel that we liked, that we felt was us, and
well,
kind of stuck with it.
Well, with Scars Remain, being that I discovered you, I remember how I discovered it, because at the time, like, I was very much into All That Remains and Kill Switch Engage, Threat Signal,
yes.
A lot of those bands. And I definitely, like, when I listen to a track like Love and Hate, on and on, I mean, that definitely has this sort of, like, for lack of better words, metalcore style. I think people who were
Yeah.
very much into Under Oath or Norma Jean at that time would very much have appreciated that sound as well.
So on this bus right now, this guy right here, our original guitar player, he would go to the back of the bus and he would play the entire Kill Switch album just from front to back as his warm up before we would play a show.
Wow.
That's just what he did to warm up. He would just track one all the way to the end, play the entire album, then we would go play a show.
Wow.
I mean, it was yeah. So I mean, that was kind of like I'm saying, like that. All those bands, we loved them all. We were just huge fans of everyone, and just real fans of everyone's art. And it always finds a way to seep into what we're doing.
Yeah. Do
But
you?
that's why it's very eclectic.
Well, absolutely, it's very eclectic. And when I interview a band and ask like how they feel about their new album in a way, and a lot of times they'll say this is the music we've always wanted to make throughout our career. But I mean, we
Right.
could never foresee what the world would take in 1995. We never know where life is going to take us, what we're going to experience. So, could you say Skeleton Songs, and now with this new music they're releasing, is this the vision you've always had for Disciple, or is this just this is the Disciple that we are now, and who knows where life is going to take us 10, 15 years from now?
That's definitely what it is. This is the disciple that we are now, and I think that you can look back at all those albums. That's who we were then. And it really is a representation of all the guys in the band of kind of what not only what we're feeling, what we've been going through, what we're facing, mentally, physically, spiritually. Just then we'll write about that, and then also, but like what we like to hear. That's kind of our method to writing music is like we want to write what we think people will like, but we also want to write what we will like because if we have to get up on stage and play it. So if we don't like it, we don't want to play it. So we want to write what we think someone is going to enjoy, but also what we're enjoying. So like a song like If You Say So that just came out a few months ago. I mean, it sounds like Skid Row from 1990 to me, and I like that. And so I think there's elements of it that other people will like, but at the same time, it's like if they don't like it, it's okay. I like it. You know what I mean? And you have to play that game a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think that makes it easier to sort of try new things in the future. It's not like you have a formula. It's not like you guys are like AC/DC or like a death metal band where like you kind of have to
Right.
maintain like a formula.
And that's kind of what I've always told the guys when we write is like don't be enslaved to a genre because that's not real. It's not a thing for us. Like be focused on, is it good? If it's good, it's going to make the album.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whatever genre you want to, however you want to describe the song. So like Sound the Alarm, for example, it doesn't sound like, a lot of the things from Skeleton Songs, right? And that's just it. It doesn't have to. We think it's good. So therefore, that's why we did it.
Yeah, I mean, you play me 30 seconds of a song, you can almost tell that would be off of By God, or that would be off of Attack, or that would be off of Oh God Save Us All. So there's 10.
It's so cool. You actually do know our stuff. I love it.
Of course, of course. I what it is because I'm also like a big fan of artists. Oh, did I lose you for a second? Oh, yeah, I got you. All right. I'm a big fan of like artists such as Red or Skillet and a lot of that sort of style. So like again, like my love for that music combined with the love of metalcore, it just kind of like there you go. Disciple was sort of the recommended band. When it comes to the lyrics, have you always needed to hear the music before you came up with the lyrics, or could a lyrical idea maybe help determine the outcome of the sound?
So every single song's different. It's almost like which song do you want to know about because the guys are so talented. They're always writing songs. And so like Josiah, who wrote Sound the Alarm, he wrote it with Kellen from Memphis Mayfire. And so that song has its own story that, kind of existed in with those two gentlemen. And then a song like If You Say So was, the guitar part was written by Andrew, and then we kind of just built this whole thing around it. We literally wrote the whole bridge together in the studio together. So it started music first, but then a song like Resurrecting Reasons, I just sat down with the guitar and wrote the entire thing all in one sitting. Nothing even changed. It just basically how I wrote it. It's how it ended up in the studio. So every single song has its own story. There's no there's no like the way the sausage is made in a factory, like step one, step two. There's none of that. It's literally step four becomes step one sometimes.
Yeah. But depending on what the material is about, does it maybe resonate with you on a different level? Do you feel like you channel a different energy depending on the lyrical subject matter? If it's more like personal, if
Oh
it's
yeah.
coming from more an external.
Oh yeah. Like resurrecting reasons I lived it. So like if I sing it, I get lost. You know, for sure. Um, and Promise to Live is a song that's deals with suicide. And we've had so many people come up to us and say things that are just so heavy that I mean, you don't even know how to you know understand what they're going through and what they're talking about their experience. And you're singing this song that someone said it saved their life. It's I don't know. It's very surreal. It's very cathartic, very surreal. So yeah, it changes the way you perform it
Do you
for
think
sure.
that do you think that that adds another layer of meaning or another layer of context that wasn't there when you first wrote it?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, yeah, absolutely. When you're writing something and you're hoping it becomes good, or you're hoping that it becomes something that means something to somebody, and then when it finally does, yeah, I mean, we sat around here. We played this tour called Winter Jam, and we sat around here on this bus. And every night, someone came up to us after the show and told us the story of how they were going to commit suicide. I mean, I didn't even realize that it was, that much of like almost like a pandemic. And it was every single night we were hearing these stories. We were just all just sitting around in a circle with our heads down. We was like, I can't believe it. Like we just thought we were writing a song. I even kind of told them, I was like, man, I don't want to really write a song about suicide. I don't really, know that that's the thing that's anybody's, dealing with or going through. It turns out, like you said, after the fact, I'm just kind of humbled. And so there's an element of it. I feel like, sometimes songs get written and things get said that are probably maybe God saying it through us instead of us. Cause, we were like, we ask these silly questions like, oh, is this cool to say or is this not cool to say? But it's something that somebody needs to hear.
Yeah, one of my personal favorite songs is "Love Hate" because I like the idea where because I've always said that the love for something could stop in an instant, but hatred seems like it could go on and on and on and on forever. So that was sort of my interpretation of that song, and I guess the way that you just say it goes on and on and on. You outdid Journey with using that line. It goes on and on and on. But
That's funny.
yeah.
I should have worn my Journey shirt for this interview.
Yeah, no, because I could go the rest of my life without hearing that song. That's basically, and I love Pantera, but that is the walk outside of metal.
Right.
So
Yeah, I had to go back to what I was thinking when we wrote that song. It was just it's kind of like there's some verses in the Bible like there's a time for love, there's a time for hate, it's time for war, a time for peace. Yeah, and it's almost like history just keeps repeating itself, and it's like this disease that will never be cured. With humanity, and I was a little frustrated by it, I guess, and just decided to write about it.
Scars Remain, be honest, was probably the angriest Disciple record, right? Or the darkest, for lack of better words.
It's up there for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, anger is a great energy. It's a very useful tool, and I think obviously we're Christians and it's not, we're Christians that try to be very real, open and honest and vulnerable. And so anger is something that we are not afraid to channel.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because I've interviewed a lot of Christian bands, whether it will be Skillet or
Sure.
Striper or Under Oath, or if they're still in that category. But there's a lot of different, because I never considered Christian metal to really be a genre because so many Christian metal bands sound so different. It's not like death metal or black metal or something where you have a sort of sound. But I am wondering, to express your spirituality and your source of salvation, why do you feel that the art that we get from Disciple has always been the best way to express that energy and to express that salvation?
Honestly, it was the way that I was reached as a kid. I was introduced at this really cool youth group that at the church that I was going to as a 11-year-old kid. And I think you had to be like 13 years old to join the youth group. And so those kids were, older than me and cool, and I looked up to them or whatever. And the youth pastor one day just for whatever reason just decided to be nice to me and said, "Hey man, I think you'd like this album." And he gave me a White Cross album, which was this is like, I'm really old, so this is like 1987, at this time. And then I just fell in love with it. It was metal. It was this Christian metal, and it was metal, like what metal sounded like in '87 anyway. And and then it became introduced to this other band called Petra. And I became huge fans of these bands, and would go and watch them play and perform. And Christian rock in the '80s, people don't understand that, now in 2025, it was extremely dangerous and rebellious and not accepted. I mean, Christians did not, my family did not accept it. This youth pastor did give it to me, but my mom was like, in this conservative Christian family going to church, and she was not happy about it. And so I would go to these concerts and watch these guys perform, and they were very evangelistic in the way that they were approaching their art. They would get up there and play their songs, and then they would talk about Jesus in between, the songs or whatever, or give their testimony about how they came to Christ, and actually give people the opportunity to give their life to Christ at these shows. And I would look around, and I would see all the kids, wearing AC/DC shirts or Metallica shirts or whatever the hardest, darkest music of the time was. And I was like, man, these guys are like talking about something they really believe in, and here are these kids that I think are cool, because Metallica is one of the greatest bands of all time. So this kid's wearing a Metallica shirt. He's like actually listening to this guy talk about Jesus. How does this happen? This is a small miracle, And I just thought it was one of the most interesting and cool, courageous, boldest things I'd ever seen. And knew that's what I wanted to do in my life.
Do you find, because how many times have we heard that rock and roll is devil music? I mean, we've all heard that at least one point in our life. And I mean, look, I know, I believe it was Sony from POD is very much in line with his faith, and he said like there's people who are telling him he's going to hell because he has tattoos and whatnot. And I am just wondering, and now it's funny because I think it's almost the opposite. It seems like rock and roll has been more embraced by people who are very spiritually inclined, and now it's like, but if you say that you're a Christian in like a metal show, they see that that's almost kind of like a sin in and of itself. But I'm just wondering, how do you find, because in the end this is rock and roll, you're playing at bars, people are drinking, people are going to these shows, and there's plenty of gluttony around there. Do you find that there is almost a fine line between expressing this salvation and also in the industry in which you express it?
It's actually easy for me. I mean, like, I don't really expect people who aren't Christians to act like Christians. That's be a very weird thing to do, and I understand a lot of people might do that. But Jesus, in my opinion, was really popular around people who weren't, religious, and I think it was his character, which was very attractive and infectious and loving, and kind of like the whole living righteously, that comes later, like really accepting that your life matters and that God loves you and that you're not a mistake. I mean, that comes first, and that's easy to tell somebody, because that doesn't matter who they are, what skin color they have, or what they've done, what they've been through, all of that stuff. So that's easy for me to walk into a bar full of a whole bunch of different people and talk about how much God loves them, because every single one of those people were created in the image of God. So it's not a hard thing for me.
Do you find, because circling back to your lyrical writing, because singing about heavy subject matters, sometimes darkness and agony and suicide and whatnot, I've always said that sometimes when we have this, there is the very famous saying, when we are at our worst, art is at its best. But sometimes I feel like that's a slippery slope.
Dude.
But it is a slippery slope sometimes. When like darkness is the fuel to our fire, we could sometimes become victimized by our own product and almost sometimes succumb to madness in the creative process. So without making this question longer than it needs to be, do you find that the creative process can sometimes be just as deteriorating as it can be cathartic?
Well, it's therapeutic for me, honestly. Our old drummer, original drummer, he used to jokingly pray. We would just like get around, just praying together, or whatever. He's like, "Dear God," and he'd be half joking, ask God, just have steer of his life so we can write some good songs, for this next album. And I'd be like, dude,
Mm.
that's not cool, because he knew that great songs come from, pain, and going through some kind of hard time. And I do, like losing, people that are close to me, being able to write about is very therapeutic, going through, rock bottom in my life and things that I've experienced, writing about it is very therapeutic. And the beautiful thing that I found about it is all these awful, terrible things that I've been through in my life. Um, there's other people that's been through the same thing. And so even though when I feel like I'm writing this song for myself and I'm writing this song about myself, someone else hears it and hears their story in the song. And that's a really cool thing, as an artist to get to experience.
Now the inspiration is sometimes it's like lightning. It could strike when you least expect it, and and it could be gone within a moment. So when you think of an idea and then you have to replicate that, and then on top of that bring it to a live setting and make it just as true and organic as you were when you wrote it, how do you sort of replicate that? Do you is there sort of like do you have to almost kind of put yourself in the same headspace when you're playing a song live as you did when you first wrote it, or is that impossible?
Honestly, we were a really good live band before we were ever a good band. Before we were ever writing good songs. I think you can go back and see that in 1995. What was I thinking album? The songs were okay, but we were still trying to figure out how to write songs. But we could play them really well. We'd get up on stage and just because that we were fans. Our drummer was a huge, Living Color fan, and our guitar player was, just a huge 80s guitar, Van Halen, Dokken, whoever, and so we've been performing in our minds since we were children. You know what I mean? So we knew what we wanted to do when we got on stage. So that being said, we are often thinking about how this is going to go over live, when we're writing songs, and even when we write a good song, we're like thinking about, yeah, this is probably not going to go over well live. It's just going to be a good song for the album. When we think in terms like that. So one of the fun things is whenever you're writing a song, there's a song on our new album, Skeleton Songs, it's called Scapegoat. It was literally written with live in mind. It wasn't even written for it to be listened to. It was just written to perform. And it's got all these built-in moments, live where we're just, really getting into it ourselves and the crowd's getting into it. And so, I hope that answers your question. We're definitely thinking about that.
Definitely, you definitely did. But I've been to my fair share of recording studios, whether it was like a high end, very well-made recording studio, or people who have studios in their basements, and they always have one thing in common: they don't feel like a very lively place. They feel like almost like an interrogation room in a way at times. And like, how do you? It's true. They're freaking freezing cold. You want to be careful not to break any of the high-end gear there. And so, like, how do you go in a vocal booth in such a very controlled and static environment and bring in the emotions that I think is prevalent in all of your music? How do you bring those emotions in such an environment like that?
Well, we're very lucky because our guitar player is our producer right now, and so back in the day, I think he's done the last. I don't know, Josiah. You did Skeleton Songs, you did Honor and Glory, so those two albums and some deluxe songs. So He's sitting right over there, so he's listening to this interview as we're doing it. We've been very lucky. We've worked with all these producers, had to go to the studios or whatever, but now we're doing, our albums with our guitar player at his studio. And so that is very laid back, no pressure, because we're all best friends. And so there's not really, doesn't take very much effort to get into it, because it's very, very relaxed. But yeah, sure. Back in the day, I remember, and he's a great friend, Travis Wyrick, who would do a lot of our albums. Sometimes he would say things that was just that that put a lot of pressure on you. He was like, "All right, that was good. Now do it again. Try not to suck so bad this time," or something like that. And you're just sitting there like, "I'm trying."
Yeah.
This
is why I could never be in a band. Just the thought. I've done thousands of these interviews, and every songwriting story always sounds inspiring and all this, but the thought of having to go through it, just, hearing people hit the same drum pattern 1,000 times or play the same bass note 1,000 times, it sounds exhausting.
Well, I'll tell you, the most painful thing that I do is scream. So, screaming during a concert is nothing. It's fine. But in the studio, you kind of put a little extra to it because it's going to be like what everybody's going to hear. And then they'll say something like, "All right, do it again. Do that scream again. We're going to track it twice." Then they'll say, "Okay, scream it again." So now you've screamed this scream, as opposed to when you're doing it live, you do it once and you don't do it with everything you got. But in the studio, you're doing everything you got. Now do it again. Now do it again. Maybe do it again for the fourth time. And I'll just get these like almost concussion grade headaches that I don't know how to. The only way I can explain it is like I'll be screaming, and then as soon as the note is done, it's like then I breathe in the air, and the air goes, and it's like this vice on my head, and I've fallen out, hit my head, passed out, whatever. So it's actually really painful screaming in the studio. So it's not just an emotional thing. It's actually like I kind of wonder if I've done some damage sometimes. This kind of having to lay on the floor and recover, kind of like getting into a fight.
You have a very eclectic voice, which I think is key to all the sounds of Disciples. What makes Disciple such a unique band? Does different usages of your voice express a different side of who you personally are?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I heard there's an incredible album by Skid Row called Subhuman Race, and it was from 1994, 1995, and he was. Again, I think probably the mentality of bands like that came out of the 80s, grunge had taken over, and they're trying to figure out how to still exist at this time. And so I feel like Sebastian Bach was experimenting with singing and screaming. He was like, he would go in and out flawlessly. He'd be singing 1 second, and then they would like turn into a scream, but the scream would have melody and it would be a note. And I was completely enamored by that style of singing, and was like, I want to do that. And I really started trying to pursue that and trying to figure out how to do that well. And so that's kind of been my journey, is like not just screaming just to scream, but actually screaming a note and being melodic, with the scream, and then trying to come out of it and still sing like, someone who's not screaming all the time. And so like just really just kind of flawlessly go in and out of both things. And that's really the influence where that came from.
And the final question,
was that album.
And that you let me perfectly into the final question, because the last thing I wanted to talk about was sort of like inspiration. Do you believe inspiration as an artist can be sought out? Can you go out and look for that, or do you just kind of have to let it strike you?
I look for it. In the bands that open for us. I look for it, if I'm going to go watch a band that's been around longer than us, like Def Leppard. I look for it at a comedy show. I look for it everywhere. Is someone speaking, someone saying something interesting? I'm always looking for ways to be better and ways to communicate our art in better ways. And because This is what I believe. I think that, our message is a very powerful message. And I think it's the greatest message, of all time, that love is what can change the world. And, it's funny that like that's the one word that describes God in the Bible. First John is like, God is love. And then the two things that God asks us to do is that to love him and love others and love ourselves. So I guess it would be three. And so you got this powerful message, but now you combine what is it about music that makes words mean something? If I just read, words to you right now, there's these beautiful words. I read them to you. It probably, it'd probably be pretty interesting. But if I sang them to you or just put them to this powerful melody and this powerful song and these instruments and all these moments, all of a sudden these words just we're now just exponentially magnified and have all this meaning. And the greatest thing that music does is it really tears down like the wall of your soul, just to be able to, like, if I say words to you, and your head is the only thing that hears those words, but music like goes past your head into your heart, into your soul, and allows those words to kind of, live there. And that's what we try to do, and we're definitely thinking about that, whenever we are writing something. We don't take it for granted. We look at it as a very powerful thing. And that's why we're huge fans of all these bands, from, the bands of the 2000s, even, going back to the Beach Boys and Van Halen. It doesn't matter. You can name anybody, that's playing right now. And, we're fans of them because, their art, speaks to us. And so that's what we try to do as well.
Absolutely, and that's a great way to describe inspiration, and it comes from everywhere. Like I said, I love like a lot of Christian bands like you guys and Skillet, but I'll also listen to Behemoth and Watain at the same time. Like just
Of course.
to have that sort of
Same.
like that dark.
Same. We actually don't listen to very much Christian music because they're all friends of ours.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to rip them off and accidentally be inspired, really close friends with the guys in Red and Skillet. And so sometimes like just loving a new Red album, I'll just be like, listening to it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this album is so good. And I'll sit down and write a song, and one of my guys will be like, that sounds just like that. I'm like, dang it. And so I have to like temper my, because, we kind of swim in the same circles with Christian, concerts or whatever. So we try not to listen to each other too much.
Yeah. Well, hey, Red, if you're listening, I would get on this podcast anytime. They're the next bucket list, Ben. But before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for all these years of amazing music and inspiring me on a personal level as well. Just with the release of these new singles coming out, what else could we be expecting from Disciple in the near future, if you're allowed to say at this very moment, of course?
That's it. That's what we're doing right now, man. As we're laser focused on getting these songs out, and that's the most important thing that we're doing. We got another song coming out at the end of the month, and then the full deluxe edition coming out April 20 something. So the end of March for a new single, and then a couple of new songs that will be on the deluxe edition. Also, a whole bunch of live songs, and maybe even like an EDM remix of one of the songs. So
I love it when you do acoustic remixes of some of your songs. So I'd love to hear an EDM.
There will be one on that. Yeah,
there'll
be an acoustic remix on a song. Yeah,
I can't wait to hear that. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Disciple. New stuff coming very soon. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.